Hello everyone. Today is going to be colorful. I'm going to show you a tutorial on a topic that has been close to my heart for a long time, how to create color palettes for presenting information. Because there's one aspect that's often ignored. When I use different colors, the colors shouldn't suggest priorities. Just as important, when I choose colors as backgrounds, text on that color should be equally easy to read. Let's take the following palette as an example. This is the palette you usually get with an HSB color picker. H stands for hue, S stands for saturation, and B stands for brightness. If you place black text over the palette, the text is most visible over yellow and cyan, and less obvious over blue. HSB color pickers can be found in Inkscape, for example. In addition to the usual changes via the red, green, or blue channels, HSB offers the option of changing only the color direction. This is therefore a good way to colorize different representations. Here I have superimposed the HSB palette on top and the LAB palette on the bottom. The LAB palette also uses every color direction, but changes the brightness depending on the color direction. This creates a more uniform contrast. So the next step is to figure out how to create an LAB palette and how to transfer and import this palette into programs such as Inkscape or GIMP. The command line tool Imagemagick enables us to do this. I will walk you through the necessary commands, step by step. The basis of the line is the convert command. First, I set the size of the image. This determines how many colors I want to have. Then I create a gradient. If I don't specify any other colors, a gradient from black to white is automatically created. The gradient always runs from top to bottom, so I rotate it 90 degrees. The image is still too small in the preview of my image viewer, so I scale the image up. This gives me a palette of 16 shades of gray. In the future, the palettes will become a little more complex and not only change the color direction, but I also want to change the brightness and saturation. That's why I'm now adding more pixels in height. I also want to display the palette as a donut, which helps with perception when the colors form a smooth transition from the last color to the first color. To bend the palette into a donut, I use the command distort polar 0. To make the edge circular, I set the virtual pixel to white. If I don't choose a square image, I still have a border on the left and right after converting to polar. Since the image is cropped to the donut, I add another crop. Now for the hole in the middle for the donut, I can do that by adding a border to the bottom of the image. Now I want to add the height, the second parameter, to the palette. To do this, I will use the combine command in conjunction with a color space. For each parameter in the color space, I create a separate layer, which I then merge into the image. So far, I have used the width of the image to create the brightness of the palette. Now I want to use the height of the image as a parameter for saturation. To do this, I enter a gradient for the second layer. This time, I explicitly specify the values for the gradient. Later, I can use this to control the saturation or brightness. Now I'm going to change the creation of the layers slightly. In the HSB color space, the first layer is responsible for the color direction, where I now set the complete gradient from white to black. The second layer is responsible for saturation, where I also set a gradient. Here, I'll specify more precisely in which areas the values should lie. This allows me to limit the degree of saturation. The third layer specifies the brightness, where I want to have a uniform value. I'll leave the rest of the command unchanged. The result is a color palette with different saturation levels. I should note that the first and last values are almost identical in terms of color direction. Black and white give an almost identical shade of red as the color direction. I will have to take this into account later when transferring the palette. Of course, I could also use Imagemagick to remove the last column of pixels. To illustrate how the color model affects brightness perception, I will increase the resolution. When I display the palette now, you get a very smooth gradient. This makes the perceived brightness of the individual colors more visible. The three colors yellow, cyan, and magenta appear brighter than blue, red, and green. Because the colors yellow, cyan, and magenta appear brighter, there are color spaces that adjust brightness. These color spaces are intended as perceptually uniform spaces in which a specific numerical change corresponds to a similar perceived color change. One of these color spaces is LUV, another is LAB. Imagemagick offers a very useful variant, LCHUV and LCHAB. Side note: if you want to list all available color spaces in Imagemagick, enter the command convert List color space. For representation as a palette, the order of the layers has been changed in terms of their importance. Brightness is the first layer, instead of the last layer as in HSB. The layer with saturation remains in second place, but is no longer designated with an S for saturation, but with a C for chroma. The third layer is then the color direction. The result is a color wheel with a perceived uniform brightness. Now back to the palette representation. I want to have 16 color directions. Because the first and last colors are identical, I take a palette of 17 pixels and remove the last pixel. Now I convert the image into text, which I can then use as a palette for Inkscape with minimal effort. This is done using the shortcut TXT and a colon. The color codes still have a 16-bit representation, but I only need 8 bits, so I change the output to 8-bit representation. The text result is not yet in a form that I can use, but with a few sed commands I can get it pretty close. The last column has to go, so I use a sed command to remove everything starting with a space, and followed by non-spaces until the end of the line is reached. The pixel coordinates at the beginning also have to go, so I remove everything from the beginning of the line up to the colon and the following space. All brackets have to go. All commas have to become spaces. Remove all decimal places. This is often a step I do by hand, because it's the only way I can round up or down. The script only rounds down. The last step is the obligatory removal of more than one space in a row.